There's pros and there's cons. There's a lot more traffic and a lot more potential for sales, but as Mackenzie's stating, it's not always fun.
Yeah, tell him. She's growing and she's getting a little more hair, so that's always fun. Can't wait till I can actually clip a bow in it. And so you just have to make sure that, and starting to pull up, just making sure she's not pulling up on the wall where there's multiple socket. And she's also she's cutting her first tooth.
Hey guys, it's Katie from Without a Crystal Ball. Welcome back to my channel. It is Friday, June 1st. All right, so if you were Josh Duggar and it was preparing for a long summer and you had just found out that you're in your permanent home for the next 12 years, what would you be thinking about? What would you be doing? Well, if you're Josh Duggar, you're not doing a whole lot. You're apparently in a brand new unit and you are sticking to your room for the most part because family members of inmates that are in the same unit as Josh say that Josh has settled into his new place and he is kind of hanging out by himself. But I'm learning some new details about this yard and about this facility that I think is going to be a little bit shocking to you because Josh Duggar is going to be in for a rude awakening. One of the big factors for Josh is that he comes from a conservative family that has very outspoken beliefs about various populations outside of their Christian family values. Now, we are not here to say anything other than what is being reported, and so that's where I'm going to go with this. This is not a commentary about anything related to any community or any group of people. The facility that Josh is a part of at Seagoville is what's called a protective custody yard, or it's what's referred to as by inmates as a protective custody yard. These are facilities that house the most vulnerable people in the system, in the federal system, that need an extra layer of protection and need to be around others who are also in a similarly vulnerable position. So inmates that have found themselves targets of or vulnerable to inmates being rude to them or obviously potentially hurting them can end up in these specific jails or systems, and these same units also offer different treatments. Now, the unit that Josh is involved in is specifically for SOs, and so a large majority of them, over 40% of the inmates there are SOs. Because of that, there's a lot of people there that are for the same offenses that Josh is at, and so people like Josh are not abnormal. There's a lot of them walking freely on the grounds. When you look up reviews about this specific facility, it's a facility that's designed for every single kind of person to be able to interact and walk the yard and go do rec together without the fear of anything bad happening to them. That means there's also vulnerable populations like the LGBTQ+ that are also housed in the same units. So Josh is going to be in units with a lot of people that are LGBTQ+, and apparently the people that I've spoken to that have been to Seagoville, I've spoke to a former inmate that served 4 years there, and I've also spoken to family members that are currently there. The LGBTQ+ are very well protected, as well as there's a sort of no tolerance policy for any sort of, hate directed towards them. And because of that, everyone that goes into these facilities has to be able to coexist and be tolerant of the LGBTQ+ inmates that are around them. Because of that, it's a world of being able to coexist. So everyone is sort of ingrained that they have to all get along. And so Josh, coming from the background that he is, where his family is very anti-LGBTQ+, this will be in many ways kind of he'll be exposed to a whole new world in this facility, and he'll have to learn how to tolerate, and he'll have to learn how to get along, which is going to be interesting because Josh Duggar's family has been very outspoken about their feelings on the LGBTQ+. Because of their environment and because of the culture that exists there, there's apparently also a lot of relationships that spawn in this facility. And this is kind of what someone who was there for 4 years told me, is that there's a lot of inmate and inmate consensual relationships, even though it's prohibited in the facility. It doesn't mean that it doesn't happen, and that a lot of the inmates, even though they are married or go in heterosexual, will become what's called gay first stay. And so they will participate in these types of relationships while they're there out of a sense of needing closeness, frustration, whatever it may be. But it's not uncommon for these types of relationships to move towards the physical, which again is prohibited in these facilities. But multiple people I've talked to, including the former inmate and people that are in, have family members in, have told me that this happens there all the time. And even if it's prohibited, doesn't mean it doesn't happen. Now, whether or not there's going to be SA that happens there, I was told it does happen, but it's more unlikely. And if it does happen, it's rarely reported, because reporting it means that they would get in trouble. And there's a strict hierarchy there about how you don't tell on other people. And if you do, then you get ostracized by the groups. And so a lot of stuff goes unreported. Many of you have asked if Josh will be a target of any type of SA at this facility. And like I said, everyone I've talked to said for the most part, it's not a lot of SA that happens here. It doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It's more consensual from the way that it's described. Again, these are the words from former inmates or people that have family members there right now. So when it comes down to Josh, he's going to have to learn how to get along with the LGBTQ+. He's going to be surrounded by a lot of LGBTQ people, and the guards are all like supportive of the LGBTQ+ because of that. And another thing that I was told is that some of the inmates during quarantine, due to this large population of LGBTQ+, there's this big, some of the inmates have roommates that are really big into Broadway musicals, and during quarantine, one of the family members said that the inmate's roommate and their loved one sang Broadway musicals and performed them out of boredom. So Josh might have to get used to singing and music that he's not used to in the IBLP as well. This might be the very first time that Josh has any level of exposure to anything that's not Christian fundamentalism in a lot of ways, outside of what he's seen in Washington, D.C. So Josh might start hearing Broadway musicals. Josh will be around a lot of people in the LGBTQ+. There's a lot of relationships that happen in this facility. So I wanted to clarify something about the whole thing about accountability there. So I had noticed in the comments that people were saying that people there just don't care whether or not you're actually honest, or if you take a part of your, like if you don't take responsibility for your crimes, or if you lie. I got some more clarification from a former inmate who basically explained it this way to me. Again, they were there for 4 years, and they explained it to me that when you're there, the biggest thing is that if you're a liar, you are not trusted. And so people have a really good sense of being able to sniff out people that are not honest. And if they go up to Josh and he starts lying about what he's done, he's going to be marked by the leaders. And apparently there's hierarchies in every single unit. And whoever is the guy that's running the show, I mean, obviously the guards run the units, but they have their own subcultures. And so if they determine that Josh is lying or he's not being honest about his life, they're not going to trust him. And when they don't trust someone, they're going to be labeled as someone you don't mess with, someone you don't interact with. He'll be ostracized outside of the group to the lowest of the low with the other SOs that are like him. And so the only way that he is going to be able to be accepted by the group is by being honest and not lying about why he's there. And it comes down to respect. And so the way that they explained it is that not being truthful and not owning what you've done is totally disrespectful to anyone else. And they'll show that as a sign, as you're not trustworthy. I'm not going to tell you anything. I'm not going to give you any information because you're going to lie. With that being said, once you're ostracized from the group and they've labeled you sort of as a outcast, you're stuck there. And so it's not a good place to be, which is again why you need to be honest and not, you got to kind of play by the politics in the prison system. So a separate inmate who served at a separate prison but also was in the same type of place that Josh is in today basically said that if you're in classes and when you're doing the SO program, part of the program teaches about boundaries, healthy relationships, motion, and self-regulation. And as a participant in the therapy, you're asked to incorporate your crime into it. And the very last group that you go through is about regulation. And if you're in the class and you continue to victim blame and not take responsibility, they basically will kick you out according to the inmate, and then they write it in a report that the SO on the SO registry, and the probation get when you get out. So basically what happens is, if Josh doesn't take responsibility and refuses to go, and he goes through this therapy, but he refuses to acknowledge that he did anything and that his crime was involved, if he gets all the way to the end, they're going to write that in his final report. They're going to say that he still denies it. They're going to put that on the registry when he's out in the world, that he still denies it. In order to successfully complete the program, you have to acknowledge that you victimized other people, and you can't blame anyone else but yourself. So basically, not only does he have to deal with the hierarchy of not lying out of disrespect to the people in his unit, but then he also, if he goes through the treatment and he lies, it's going to end up in his reports that go to the probation officer, which again shows a lack of remorse and a lack of being able to reform, which will make him a higher chance of recidivism. So Josh has a lot to lose if he doesn't basically own up to what he's done. And then one other thing I wanted to share with you guys is that some of you had asked about the violence that happens here. First of all, it does happen, but as far as I can tell, and from everyone that I spoke to, whether they're have family members that are currently there or former inmates that I've spoken to about the low security facilities, is that the low security facilities have a very low tolerance or no tolerance policy when it comes to violence. And so because of that, if you were to get into a fight with another inmate and it gets reported and found out by the guards, you can actually get sent to medium or high security prisons, where other things that wouldn't happen in low security are assured to happen in higher security facilities. So most inmates will refuse to get involved in that side of things because they don't want to lose the privileges that they have. They want to stay in a facility where they have a little bit more freedom and flexibility. And if they get caught doing any of that, they can get moved to a facility where there's a lot more happening and a lot more harm can happen to people. So there's incentive to the inmates to not fight. It doesn't mean it doesn't happen. A former inmate said there's commonly get punches in the gut, shouting in the face. You might get shoved. You might be intimidated. But as far as like the really gory stuff that happens at some of the larger prisons, that doesn't happen as frequently there, simply because of that. If it does, they're going to for sure get moved into a higher security facility. That doesn't mean, again, it doesn't happen. I'm just trying to explain to you the rules. And again, a lot of this goes unreported, and so you might never know. But if there was visible injuries, obviously things have to get reported. And finally, Josh's money is becoming a topic of discussion. But as far as extortion, the way that it was explained to me by a former inmate is that some of the guys might buddy up to Josh and be like, hey, Josh, if you give me some of your commissary, I will protect you from X person. And then they'll promise that protection, and then they'll take the commissary from Josh, and then they'll give it to they'll share it with other people. But in a medium security prison, the way that they described it, if that were to happen and Josh were to say no, he would face like physical consequences. But it's less likely in a situation like this where Josh would be physically hurt if he were to say no to that. But they say that the inmates do prey on people like Josh who have zero street smarts. So he's going to be a target for people because he's going to be looked at as weak. So it's extortion, but it's not extortion. That's kind of how they said it. Like in the world of prison, it's low level extortion. I'm learning, you guys, that this is a whole different world. They have a whole different language and they have a whole different subculture. So I want to thank everyone that's been reaching out. But yes, Josh Duggar is in a unit. He apparently has air conditioning. He's apparently not leaving his room very much. He is being eyed up and down by other inmates. And apparently he so far has been left alone. And as long as he plays the role and doesn't piss off the people that are in the hierarchy above him, he'll adapt. And there could be relationships in the future because that's apparently not uncommon, which makes this whole twist wild. And I think the biggest twist for me is that he's in a facility around a lot of LGBTQ people and in an environment that is told that they have to accept all populations regardless. and a no tolerance of hate for the LGBTQ plus. So in that respect, it is fascinating given his fundamentalist background. It's going to be a rude awakening for Josh for sure. All right, what are your thoughts? Tell me in the comments below. Bye guys.